Hi, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us on Sunday. I know it's a valuable time for coaches, the weekends, but I hope we can make it worthwhile. I'm sure a lot of you, like me, are dealing with competitive players, and I'm sure that over the years you've noticed, as I have, the number of mental issues on the court around. Yeah, the issues vary from anger issues to confidence issues. There's a whole raft of problems players face on the court. And although some at the very top have mastered the mental part of their game, many of us, and I would say 95% of the players, suffer from some form of mental issues when they play tennis. And so the talk today is to try and integrate mental training into every session you do. And this will have a profound effect on the results of your players. Many years ago, I was at a conference where the speaker asked me how much does mental training or the mental aspect play in your sport? And I confidently answered, 90%. And I'm sure a lot of you would sort of be around that number. I've heard it range from 85 to 95%. But that day, I made the statement that I thought tennis was 90% mental. And it was really a second question that sort of shook me up a little bit. And that was, how much of your time do you devote to the mental aspects in your training? And I realized that actually what I was doing, my normal lesson, and I would probably suggest that yours as well, was 90% technical, and that the mental issue was being left as a minor thing. And if it was dealt with, it was normally dealt with in off court in a room somewhere with a group of players. So that really made me think. And about, I would say, 20 years ago, I made a decision that I was going to attempt to make my lessons 90% mental. And when you think about it, and we go back now to these mental issues on court and competition, when you think about it, how else is a player supposed to create that bridge from practice to matches if we don't train it within practice? I mean, you think about it, we go through this highly technical lesson during the week, and on the weekends, we expect the player to go to tournaments and perform, incredibly well. But we've never addressed the mental issues that crop up. So in effect, we're asking players to do it alone, separate. So today's talk will be on how to bridge that gap. And for me, over the years, it's been a case of gradual progress. I wasn't able to go from 0 to 90% overnight. It took time. But hopefully with this talk today, I'm going to be putting some of that experience that I had to go through, some of those lessons that I went through, and making it easier for you. Now, the first thing I think we need to understand or grasp is that your mindset has to change from the very beginning. You have to actually actively try to create a 90% mental lesson. It's no good just going to the court unprepared. You're going to have to prepare your lesson from a mental side first. And I think, one of the really important things is that you have to look at mental training as an equal. I'm sure on the court every day we have a fitness aspect, we have a technical part there, we may have a strategic sort of match play pattern part there. What I'm suggesting is your mindset changes so that you bring in mental training as an equal partner. Everything needs to be trained together at the same level at the same time. So I think the first step is that when your players walk through the gate to your court, you've got to look at each player as an individual, because not everyone will have anger issues and not everyone will have confidence issues. They're all going to vary. And if you just analyze your own players on your court for a second, you know that to be true. They're all slightly different. We're quite a complicated animal, humans. So the very fact that you're now going to look at certain players and know you're going to have to build confidence through the week, or certain players and know you're going to have to deal with their anger management skills through the week, is already the beginning of mental training as we know it. So the method I use whenever I'm teaching anything is what I call technique to test method. And basically it means that anything you're teaching on court has to be tested immediately. Not which is the case often where you're teaching something and you're giving it lots of time for the player to gain confidence. What I like to do immediately is I teach as quickly as possible, and then I put it into a test. So this is the technique to test method. However, in most parts of the world, I would coin the phrase, they use the cotton wool method. And I'll describe it because it's important we understand where we're going wrong with this. What happens in most cases is that a player is given a lesson, a technical thing or a strategic thing, and they are protected, their confidence is protected because it's a new technique, it's a new issue. And so what we tend to do is we pack our player in cotton wool so that their confidence is not hurt. Now this cotton wool method can go on for a long, long time. It could in fact go on for weeks or even months. And during that time, the player is taken to tournaments. And of course, their technique has never been tested. And so what I prefer to do, as I say, is the technique to test method. And that means take them immediately from what you have taught and put it in a test to see how it's been implemented. It's a bit like, I would imagine, baking a cake. You're putting all the ingredients together, but you can't leave it like that on the bench. It has to enter the oven to be baked. And I think, with the cotton wool method, for instance, we're not baking the ingredients. We're putting all the right things in, but we're not putting it in the oven to make sure it's baked and ready for match play. But with the technique, the test method, we're doing the baking continuously. So we save a lot of time and in fact, why are we protecting the confidence of the player when it's going to be tested later on? Surely we should put it under scrutiny. Now, next slide here. So here's a quick way or an idea on how to implement this technique, the test method. So what I like to do in a lesson is I play a lot of points. And I think if anybody was coming around the courts and looking through the fence at my lesson, they would say, this guy just plays points. But there's a lot of teaching that goes on as well. The points are simply the oven, the way to bake the technique. So in the sense of points, I normally play 7-point tie breaks or even 3 or 5-point tie breaks so that I put even more pressure on. If you have a certain strategy designed, it might be to increase the players or ask them to increase the amount of cross-court they put into points. Then I sometimes will play a 3 or 5-point tiebreak just to see a microcosm of what they're doing. Can they execute it? Now, the word test means just that. For me, the test, the points, are a way to gauge how effective my lesson has been and how much of that lesson the player has been able to grasp. And very often, it's fine. It's done. It's gone really well. And in which case, we progress it. But quite often also, it can be, you can tell that there's a certain aspect of it that's not been done so well. It might be a technical aspect, and we go backwards and maybe work on the technique of it. It may be more of a confidence issue, like training a player to take a half-court ball when the opportunity comes. And they don't do it because they're not confident about doing it. So again, you take a step backwards from the points, you address the issue, and then back into points again to bake the cake. So I hope you sort of understand now how important these points are. Now, the other aspect of it is that as a player myself many years ago, I felt that I could implement what the coach was saying quite well. And I think most good players can. But what was very frustrating for me was when the coach would continue to talk about it and take up too much time. I just wanted to get out there and give it a try. And it might not have come right in the first 10 or 15 minutes. But by experimentation and by practice, I was able to get it. So again, with good players, with competitive players, they tend to really appreciate this chance to implement points and to try points and try it under pressure. That's one of the reasons they play the game. Now, in another effort to add more mental training to each lesson, I would suggest that you try to eliminate repetition drills as much as possible. Now, repetition drills can come in the form of a basket feed or two players hitting cross court, 200 balls, 100 balls, whatever. But I would suggest to you, and we see it all the time on social media, I suggest to you that this is really not a very effective way to train the player for competition. It's a bit of a robotic way, and it's a way to maybe get some confidence, but as I'll explain in a minute, it's very false confidence. But what you're seeing a lot on social media at the moment is a lot of these gurus, tennis gurus, having players round cones and jump hoops or come from the baseline, come forward, hit a backhand, run back to the backhand, to the baseline, back to the ball drop again. This to me is simply eye candy. It has no effect on what a player will do later in matches. Now, I know the traditional way of thinking is that this will build confidence. Many balls will build more confidence. What I'm going to say to you is, what I have seen a lot is players working with this sort of method, repetition, have surely built confidence. I know as a player I did too. But I also knew that when I got to the tournament and I played in the first match, often after the first 15 or 20 minutes, you begin to make a few errors. And that confidence you thought you had embedded in your brain has suddenly evaporated. So repetition is a false form of confidence. A monkey would be able to hit 100 forehands cross court, given that there's no decision making, given that there's no stress present, given that there's no finish to a point or creation of a point. It's simply a robotic hitting cross court. And we all begin to feel confident after 100 balls of that for several days. But again, it's false confidence, and we need to stop doing it. So the things we need to repeat in practice are things, as I mentioned, point creation, point finishing, decision making, and playing under pressure, stress. And so what I do a lot in my lessons, and the points, obviously, there's a lot of this present, I put the players into these situations throughout the lesson, regardless if they're working on a new technique or a new strategy. It's just part and parcel of what I do every minute of my session. And I think one of the things we have to remember is that without those ingredients, what are we asking the player to do? where is that bridge to competition? So again, players throughout the world are suffering from this dynamic of the cotton wool method, and it's hurting us big time. And for me, it's the number one reason why players suffer from mental meltdowns in matches. So the question could be now, because you have different age groups on court, when do you start this process? And my answer is immediately. Because on point one, we made a pact together that mental training would be treated as an equal. And I'm sure in the first lesson with a 6-year-old that you're teaching perhaps a grip or a backswing or a follow through, a technical thing like that. I'm sure that's going on. So why can't we introduce a little bit of pressure, simulate a bit of pressure and stress within the lesson, so that instead of going for months or a year feeding from a basket with a hand feed exactly where the player needs it, we may introduce some movement as soon as they, by their first or second day. And that would be my suggestion. So in answer to the question, when would I introduce it? I introduce it immediately. To me, it's an integral part of tennis. And the fact that it never gets introduced to juniors is the reason we have so many problems. So in summary, my vision for the future, or just to backtrack a little bit, I remember many years ago when I started coaching, fitness was never included in a lesson. It was done off court somewhere else, just as mental training is done now. But today, any court that you go to will feature a form of mental fitness training at the same time. It's completely integrated now with tennis, with the strokes. And, no coach would be caught dead not doing a fitness program. And we all know how beneficial a good fitness program can be to a game. It just improves the player tremendously. Now, it's my vision for the future that mental training will also be the same way. And that, pretty soon, to me, it's the next frontier in tennis. And I would really encourage you guys to take some of this on board and start to integrate mental training in your practice sessions, because as I say, when I started doing it many years ago, it made a profound difference to the results of the players I coached. So that's pretty much the points I wanted to raise. Obviously, you're free to contact me about anything you need to be updated on or enlightened on. But for now, Manjeet, are there any questions that have come through during the talk?
Yes, sir. We have one first question. Why do some players do well mentally in match and others don't?
Okay, yeah, that's an often it's something people often say. But going back to my analogy of 95% of us in tennis, we require help. There's a 5%, and I'm not sure, it could be genetics or just environment, where they just manage fine. And they come through and there's no mental issues and stress is a breeze and everything's fine. And I would put India's Yuki Bambri in that category. I feel that he's a player that even since an early age, I saw a very relaxed demeanor on court. And so I think he doesn't really have too many mental issues and never has. But again, we're dealing with the 95% of players who are good students, following our lesson plans to the T, and that actually is probably hurting them. So any others there, Manjeet?
Yes, sir. The second question is, can you explain more ways to introduce mental training into my lessons?
Okay, that's a good question, because it means some of you have the goal of implementing this stuff. Look, I over the last few emails that I've sent you, I've attached an ebook, which is free to download, and you're welcome to look through that. That contains many of what we've talked about, but also a few theories on how to sort of integrate it into your practice, and a lot of drills, good drills that have taken quite a few years to sort of refine, that you can go to immediately and put into your lesson. So, I would encourage you to upload that ebook and read it, because it'll be very helpful in this regard of putting this stuff to work on the court. So, look, thank you so much, everybody, for listening to the podcast, for the webinar, and we'll be coming up with more good topics for you to get your teeth into and be able to take to the court almost immediately. So again, I offer you my services. If there's anything you want to query me on this topic, please do so. And if you're putting it out on your court in the next few weeks, I'd be thrilled to hear how it's going and any hiccups that are occurring or any success stories you may want to share. So thank you very much again for your time this Sunday, and good luck with coaching on the court this coming week.